Hello? Oh, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So, let's see here. Hello, boys and girls. This interview is unedited and may contain adult themes and is intended for an adult audience. It is also intended for an audience who can take a joke. So if you have a lot of trigger words or require a safe space, find another show to enjoy angrily. The views expressed by guests on this show are theirs alone and not necessarily reflective of Eileen Dover or of his management. The views of Eileen Dover and his management are too insane to be credible or relatable. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today we have an amazing, iconic performer from the West Coast. I know I usually do interviews with New York girls, but this particular entertainer I just adore, and her style of entertaining is a style that I don't know if anybody can be compared. So let's just get into this interview. Ladies and gentlemen, Heklina is on the line with me.
Hi, Eileen.
How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. Just here in my little minuscule apartment in San Francisco. Not venturing out. How are you?
Doing the same, in my tiny little 7x9, my room in Hell's Kitchen. Might as well be in Idaho, though.
Have things opened up there a little bit in New York? Or is it
they have to a degree. All the businesses seem to have purchased like 2 parking spots, and they have this little seating area. So like when you're walking down the street, you're actually walking between a restaurant and it's like seating area, which is like in the street. It's really weird. It's very unusual.
Well, yeah, they're all doing that here in San Francisco too. So, but in San Francisco, it's so freezing cold during the summer that it's people sitting outside trying to enjoy drinks and they're just freezing. It's like.
They're actually snatching liquor licenses now because restaurants have sort of taken this opportunity to sort of get people out in the street, and those who haven't purchased those little like hutches or whatever you want to call them, people are just drinking and they're just drunk in the street. It's a hoot. I mean, it's just what it is, but nobody's wearing masks, so it's a little frightening.
Yeah. Oh, well. Dark times, Eileen, dark times.
True that.
Mm-hmm.
So, the last time I heard your interview with my friend Floyd, and it was rather amazing, and it inspired me to sort of want to get, your take on things. I've known Floyd for some time, and I only actually met you once, I think.
Where was that?
Well, you were doing the Drag Queens of Comedy, and it was, I think, at the Sony Theater in Times Square.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and you and I have a mutual friend, Fred Schneider from the B-52s, and I was with him.
With him? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have a very vivid memory. I was actually looking for a friend of mine, and I thought he was at the stage door. And then I opened the stage door, and Fred Schneider was talking to the security guard, and he was like, I overheard him say, "Tell them it's Fred Schneider of the B-52s."
Yeah.
And then I was like, "Oh my God, Fred Schneider!" And so I like got them in. I was so thrilled to meet him.
Yeah, I remember that. You were the first person we saw, and we were kind of both in this sort of like, very like nondescript, very I wasn't in drag or anything like that. And Fred, I don't know, the security didn't recognize him, but
there's no way the security would have, because I just judged it was a straight security guard, kind of thuggish or whatever, and I was like, this doesn't strike me as the average B-52s fan. So
yeah, he probably recognized the songs, but unfortunately he didn't. Well, it was good that you opened the door though, because we got to come back and kiki and say hello to all of you, which is a rarity because you're over there on the other coast.
Oh yeah, that was a crazy day. I remember our hotel was just right across the street from the theater. But and it was pouring rain that day, and our assistant, who was supposed to lead us to the theater, entered the directions into his phone to walk us over there, but inadvertently he entered the driving directions. So we walked all the way up 42nd Street, like for blocks and blocks in the pouring rain, crossed the street, walked back down 42nd Street, and Coco Peru was like, I'm not walking another foot until you find out where this theater is. So we went into like this coffee shop and just boycotted moving any further. And we finally arrived at the theater, and we were all drenching, soaking wet. We were so pissed. And then after the show, we walked across the street to our hotel.
So it was like right there, and
there, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of, for a big theater, it is sort of like tucked away there on 40. It's on 42nd, right on 42nd, I think. It's sort of like that, and they had metal detectors and everything. It was a really odd entry. I felt like I was going to, like, you know, some kind of like wild concert or something like that. They took, you know, our phones and everything and scanned us. And
I think quite often people, when you hire security guards, they act the same no matter what kind of event it is. And having a venue, I've learned I've had to train security guards like look at this crowd. Do you really think you need to treat them with this kind of? They don't need to be. You know what I mean? If somebody's caught smoking pot, if you ask them to leave, they will leave. You don't have to, you know, put them in a chokehold and drag them out the door, you know.
Right.
But
it was like right after the unfortunate events in Orlando, I was on my way into the Stonewall, and I had shown my ID, and Leah Delaria, you know Leah Delaria, the comedian, yeah. She was in front of me, and they wouldn't let her in, and it was because they had hired sort of those like straight big giant security guards, and they didn't recognize her, and she pulled. I recorded. It was so funny. She had a fit, but you know, in that specific instance, I was kind of like, you know, I mean, she was completely off the rails, like right off the bat, and she did the whole "Do you know who I am?" thing, and it was just really crazy. And in that instance, I actually felt for the security guard because you know, we had just sort of gone through what had happened in Orlando, so they were really trying to clamp down. So
right,
we definitely live in. And speaking of like chokeholds, you know, the whole how is everything going in San Francisco with the protests and all of that?
I mean, it is what it is. I'm not leaving my apartment hardly at all. But when I do drive around, it's pretty depressing. You know, all the shops are boarded up, and homeless tents are everywhere, and everything is closed down. And it's just not fun right now. So I'm really looking forward to leaving.
Yeah. So where are you off to?
I'm going to be going to Iceland for the month of August.
That's amazing. I understand a lot of one of the things that I got from your interview with Floyd was Heklina is actually not about like heckling. It's the Icelandic volcano Hekla.
Did Floyd figure that out? I think he did.
I think he knew that your name wasn't about heckling, but I think you filled in the rest. I think it was.
Yeah, well, it's very. It's the Hekla is a volcano in Iceland, and I moved to San Francisco from Iceland, and that is how I thought of my name.
Iceland. What is there a drag scene in Iceland? Is there a gay scene in Iceland? I don't know much about Iceland.
I mean, yes, there is a drag and gay scene, like almost anywhere, but it's very small, as you'd imagine. And I lived there. I mean, my mother is Icelandic, so I lived there as a child and a teenager and a young adult, and I can tell you it's changed. It's changed 180 degrees from how it was as far as acceptance and all that stuff. But all the drag queens there, they're very much influenced by RuPaul's Drag Race. But I definitely they know who I am there. So I'm going there, and the society is totally open. Actually, I'm going to go see Bjork 3 times while I'm there. She's doing a series of concerts there at the music hall, and I'm doing a bunch of shows for Gay Pride. So Gay Pride is the first weekend in August. So, yeah, I'm just going to have fun. I rented an apartment. And, you know, what I'm really looking forward to is just getting away from all the insanity. America's a shit show right now. And I just want to get out.
It's true. I mean, I have a friend who has dual citizenship in Mexico, and he and his partner are moving to Cancun because they're from New York. And, you know, he said, you know, they'll take, many of us New York lifers, you know, we call ourselves lifers, like you'll never get us out. He said, you know, they'll take me out in the Pine Box. And I was like, everything has changed. It's changed so much that people who said that they would never leave are leaving. And it's just really wild.
It's like I always said, you know, San Francisco, I've lived here for 29 years, and it was always a city, like no matter where I went in the world, I was always happy to return to San Francisco. But that's definitely changed in the past three or 4 years. It's become, you know, all the, well, I don't want to totally denigrate it because there's always a part of San Francisco that I will love, but so many of the things that I did love about it have been drained away by the tech money coming in. The high rents drove all the artistic people out. The homeless problem is ridiculous, where you're just, you know, it was always bad, but now you're just immediately assaulted by it the minute you step out your door. And, so I bought a house in Palm Springs, and I wonder if it's a combination of me getting older and just being and not willing to put up with like the grit of urban life. But I do really feel like it's changed a lot. It's not the same city that I moved to, and I'm sure it's the same in New York, because when I go visit New York, I'm just like, where is the sleaze? Where is the fun? You know, I don't want to go to the what is that thing where people walk? They walk through in the meatpacking district. You walk up, and is it the High Line or something?
There's a club called the Standard, and they do events there, which I, you know, can never stay awake for. And the High Line, which
it's like, please bring back the meatpacking district where people were fucking, you know, in the clubs, and I don't need a cupcake shop, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's very like Penny Arcade is actually, she's my writing coach, and she says, you know, the downfall of every neighborhood begins with a Starbucks and ends with a cupcake shop. So
exactly, yeah.
It's kind of the malevolence of the cupcake. It's kind of hilariously true.
It's either a cupcake shop or a gelato place, you know. It's like
something artisanal and bourgeois and, you know, unnecessary.
Right. It's happened to San Francisco, and before that it happened to New York in a much more drastic way, I thought, like really quickly.
Well, the thing about New York that I found that I've, you know, like I grew up in Boston, and, you know, there literally when gentrification took over, Boston was completely cleansed of, you know, I think there may be 2 gay bars, and I don't know. I don't even know. I haven't checked in with the local banter, but New York, we still are able to find each other. You know, there's still so many people that live here that are, you know, interested in making art and that are willing to, you know, to just find each other. But so much has changed, you know, with regards to the nightlife and entertainment, and, you know, you can't say anything anymore on stage. And one of my favorite, when I saw you guys in the Drag Queens of Comedy, you, Jackie Beat, Lady Bunny, you all have that amazing sensibility, which is, you know, taking something that's horrible in the world and turning it into something that we can temporarily laugh at, so that we can, you know, step away from it for a minute, you know. It seems, are you finding that, you know, audiences are less responsive, or you're getting, you know, flack for having that sensibility?
Well, I get flack. I've gotten flack all the time. Like, my humor does not fit in San Francisco anymore. But there's definitely people who do appreciate it. So there's people, and I do think it's also maybe a bit of an older thing. Like when I was doing Tranny Shack, the more offensive and more shocking and irreverent we were, the more people liked it. And they were able to see that it was satire. It was tongue-in-cheek. So I think people are just not willing to look beyond. I think people will only look at things in a black and white manner now, where it's like, oh, if you make a joke about race, you must be racist. If you make a joke about, sex or whatever, you must be sexist. If you make a joke about, whereas for me, the great thing about humor was I was holding up the topic or the issue that is taboo, and then, poking at it with a stick to remove the power from it. So, I've made fun of, AIDS and like things that have been really traumatic in my life. I've gotten through with humor. And that's why like my humor idols are people like Joan Rivers, where there was nothing off limits for her. So I'm just disappointed sometimes that people are so reactionary.
Do you think that the pendulum will swing the other way when this sort of new generation grows up? Because I remember when I was younger, I was involved in, this is like, I'm talking about 30 years ago, the early 90s when AIDS was, and we did tell jokes about AIDS, and we did tell jokes about a lot of serious things, homophobia, the police, all kinds of, turning, when certain people had to turn tricks to make a living, but would make fun of that. It would just, there were no limits, but there was an anger. We were angry. We were out in the streets protesting. We were very serious about, topics like HIV, but then we were able later on in the day to just, kick back, and laugh at the joke about it, to sort of take attention. This generation seems to be just angry. And
yeah. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with social media, because if one person picks up on something that somebody said and they have an issue with it, they can find a bunch of voices to back them up. Like just some kid on a keyboard in Kansas will be like, I have a problem with this. And so the thing about it's made everything the internet has been the great leveling field where everybody has a voice, but quite often the people who have a problem with something are much more vocal than the people who really don't give a shit. Like if the people who aren't offended by some humor, they're not going to say, oh, this is great, I don't find this offensive. But it's always the ones who are offended that are going to be much louder. And I think if we had social media back in the day of AIDS, like there was so much anger, but there was no way to express it other than to go protest. Whereas, now you can vent your anger on all these social media channels. So I totally relate to the anger, and I relate to the feeling of helplessness and frustration, and the feeling that the government at large doesn't give a shit. And so I definitely relate to the anger, but I feel the frustrating thing to me about people, the left, I'll say the left, the far left, is that they tend to lash out at the thing that is right next to them, which is their ally. They're lashing out at other drag queens or other liberals, or because they're not doing it right. You're not doing this right, instead of looking at the big picture, which is this government that wants to deprive us of our basic, rights and stuff like that. So I just wish there was more focus, because the Republicans and the right wing people, they're not offended by anything. They just nothing really phases them. I wish we could be a little bit less sensitive about things that don't matter and really focus on the things that do matter.
Well, in my experience, and I grew up like with satire, like All in the Family and the Jeffersons, and they used, words that we wouldn't use right now, or there was so much satire, and, there was like Saturday Night Live used to even be funny. It hasn't been funny for about 20 years, but, where they'd make fun of, with this pat, you could never get away with any of that now.
No.
I think it's a great distraction. I think that the right loves that we're so divided over like pronouns and these little itty bitty issues. we didn't have that luxury when people were dying of AIDS. And also, if you had a problem, you had to say it to somebody's face. You had to address it to them directly. And I think it was the reason why there was less conflict is because of what you just said. You know, you couldn't just, type a few words in and get a mob of people to agree with you.
And I think you hit it on the head there, too, is that we have a generation of people who are only used to venting their anger on a keyboard. And they're great. They're very eloquent when they have a keyboard to speak with. But when you get them in person, like I've had people attack me online, and then I say, do you want to meet to talk about this? They're like, oh, no. Like they have no idea how to actually communicate with people, face to face.
Yeah.
And that goes for other things too. I've hung out with young kids who, I go out with them for the evening and they don't say a word to me, and then at the end of the night I see their status on Facebook. Oh, I had a great time hanging out with Heklina, and I'm just like, really? Like,
I didn't think you noticed, but I would.
Like they're on their phone the whole time or whatever, But I don't want to be one of these old farts who just talks about how problematic the young kids are, because the anger is real, and they're living in a fucked up world right now.
Well, the part of me, feels very bad because, when I grew up in South Boston, which was, the only place in the Northeast where, Southern rules applied. It was very mob mentality, very homophobic, very racist, and I couldn't wait to get out of there and be the opposite. I was very, very angry and stuff like that. But, if you can't talk about something, if you can't verbalize something, if you can't say anything, how do you address, the issue? There was a point in time where a friend of mine would say, stop saying African American, not all black people are from Africa. And, but you had to still say African American. Now it's back to being black. I mean, now, LGBTQ and all the letters and this, that, and the other. I just think it is a grand distraction from sort of, we're fighting amongst ourselves. And meanwhile, the Democratic Party has turned, they're bought and sold at this point too. They're pandering to us, but they're not really doing anything. They're not really affecting change.
Right.
I feel like, if you can't talk about, the elephant in the room, how do you address it? And naturally, like you or I, who, we've been fighting these battles, using comedy or, protesting or doing what we've needed to do for such a long period of time. And I think that the issues were a lot more serious because when you and I first came out, probably, I'm imagining, I don't know what year you started your journey in the LGBTQQM, the LMNOP lifestyle, but you literally could be fired for being gay. People were dying everywhere. The government wasn't paying attention at all. You could get gay bashed and the cops would say, well, what did you do to antagonize?
Yeah, and there's no representation of us in media or film unless we were serial killers or vampires. But I do feel like for me that was when it was a bit more fun to be gay, when we were
Agreed.
the outcasts. Because once we got acceptance, and once we were, once Gay Pride was sponsored by Bud Light, and once Will and Grace happened, and all that stuff, I never signed on for the white picket fence, and I was really disappointed when the major issues became marriage equality and being able to join the military, because I never wanted assimilation. But, if people want that, that's great. But I always enjoyed, I don't want to have the white picket fence. I don't want to have the 9-to-5 job. The great thing about being gay or queer to me was that I never had to have kids, and that I could, lead this kind of life and get away from suburbia and the choking normality or normalcy of people's expectations. So anyway, things there was less to protest about. So now I feel like people wake up, they go to Facebook, and they look for things to protest or have an issue with. So it's a great echo chamber. And honestly, if I didn't have a drag career that I had to be on there all the time, I probably would not have a Facebook page.
Well, that's something that I concur with. I would definitely, it's for the promotion of, of the art,
Right.
Which so one question that I have about this sort of new generation, I know I don't want to sound like the old fogey either. Do you think that when they get a little bit older, do you think that when they age, that they'll lighten up and maybe, maybe these things won't be so important to them, or do you think it's a done deal?
Oh, no, I think everybody who's young, you come of age and you look at the people older than you, and you're like, these people have fucked up everything for me. I'm angry at these people because when you're young, you don't have shit. And you're looking at the adults, the older people around you who maybe have worked their whole lives to be a little bit comfortable, you know what I mean? And you're like, you're always angry at the people who came before you, just like you're angry at your mom and dad. And I feel sometimes like young kids that are on social media attacking people, they're attacking their mom and dad or something, you know what I mean? So I feel like I was super, super angry when I was 18, 19, throughout my whole 20s. And now, finally, when you get to be, I'm 53 now, and do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? I'd rather be happy, I'd rather be happy and be like, you're right, because they're like, shut up, grandma. I'm like, okay, whatever. I don't care, because I fought and I protested and I did all that stuff already. I care about the issues, but my way of helping is I donate and I send money, and I'm not going to be protesting and marching and attacking police. I'm just not that angry anymore, because it's going to continue. There's always going to be something to be angry at. And I think we need to focus on the real enemy. I can't say that often enough,
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think it's amazing how distracted, and like I said, the right wing loves it. I think the left wing, even, the left wing people who are in charge or in control, they love it too, because they can sort of, behind the scenes, they can throw gender, whatever pronouns out as this huge ordeal or problem. But then, in the background, they're doing, things that we wouldn't necessarily approve of, or things that are hurting our cause. So, which ultimately is just to be happy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it. I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. I love people who agree with me. No, I'm just kidding. So, when did Heklina? What was life like in Iceland for a young Heklina? Like, tell us what growing up was like in Iceland.
Well, it was, now Iceland is so in vogue and everybody's going there. Not right now, of course, with the pandemic, but it's on the map now, and the place to go. But when I was growing up, it was on nobody's radar, and it was much simpler, of course. And but as I grew older and as I became a teenager and a young adult, there was, there's nobody to have sex with, and after a while, you've fucked the entire, community of men who are out. So I remember, and also there was really no nightlife to speak of. There was maybe one bar that everybody would go to, all the gay people. So for me, I went to Europe a lot. I went to places, so I came of age in places like London, Berlin, and Amsterdam and stuff like that. I would go and explore that way, and also other places in Scandinavia. And so that's kind of what it was like. And I was always a wild kid.
Did you have the support of you've spoken about your mother. Did you have the support of your family, or was that sort of difficult?
Yeah, my mother just was never really there. She was always kind of checked out, and I think there's some mental issues there. And when people say they're afraid of turning into their parents, I'm like, oh my God, I'm terrified of that. But she was never really there as a parent figure, so I was wild, and there was really no way she could control me. I was a wild, wild kid. So when I say that I can really relate to these young kids nowadays being angry, I totally can relate because, I was going to the March on Washington. I was in ACT UP. I was doing all that stuff, and I was angry. Anyway, so I arrived in San Francisco. I kind of crash landed here, and I just met a lot of kindred spirits. And luckily, I was able to make a living early on doing the stuff that I love to do, which is nightlife, and that's like 25 years now.
Then that
I've been doing Heklina professionally.
And what inspired you? What was like to choose drag as a medium? I mean,
well, not to sound too old, but there was no RuPaul's Drag Race. There was no internet. So what I was influenced by, I was definitely enamored with the New York queens. A lot of whom have become my friends now, like Lady Bunny, Sherry Vine, Jackie Beat, people like that, Joey Arias, and but more than that, I had to before the internet. I know life was like before the internet and after the internet. So before the internet, if you were a young, curious homosexual, you went to video stores and bookstores to research. And so I guess I was influenced by cult movies, horror movies, movie stars, David Bowie, Deborah Harry, rock stars, people like that. So I kind of got, and always I think there was this sense that there was a great, big, exciting world outside of my boring reality, which I think I thank God sometimes that I am gay, because that's what drove me out of the small town, and drove me to the big city.
Yeah, I always say that even if I were straight, I would have been a wild child. I would have been, on the fringes. I would have been sort of a punk, because I also am not interested in that white picket fence and those norms, the social norms. So you get to San Francisco, and you're finding yourself. You decide to pursue Heklina, and what was San Francisco like when what year did you arrive? What was it like there?
Well, I arrived here in 1991, and it was culture shock right away, because I moved in with a house full of radical fairies, which that was very different to my reality in Iceland. Everybody was dying all around me in 1991. It was the height of the AIDS crisis, and that was a real learning experience for me too. Was I would be influenced by these older fabulous queens, and then all of a sudden they'd be dying in front of me. And so there was a real sense of immediacy and urgency in everything. Even amidst all this death and grief, there was lots of great art and great moments of beauty. And it was a different city. You could live I worked at Tower Video for minimum wage, and I paid $300 a month for some room somewhere, and you could do that now. I think now kids try to do that. They try and move to New York or San Francisco for that dream, and they just fall through the cracks. And they're
right, especially with all the pressures to you could get a job back in the day with without like a degree or without like going the traditional route, and it just seems like the kids today have been. I guess it would take a really strong character not to take some of the traditional routes now that they're not so homophobic, because of the fear of not being able to survive because everything is so expensive. And
it did. I mean, I did go through a lot of tough times initially. I had a horrible experience with my whole life I was dabbling and experimenting with drugs, and I went through the ringer here in San Francisco with that. But about 26 years ago, I made the decision to not drink or do drugs anymore, and that's kind of when I when I had this weird focus. Like I discovered once I put down the drugs and alcohol that I had this drive that I'd never really known about, and that kicked off. I did Tranny Shack, and that became successful, and I maintained the success of that, and just one thing after another.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's just a handful of drag queens who are around and still doing drag as their main income, and you're one of them, as far as I know. I mean, here in New York, Lady Bunny is not done. She doesn't work a 9 to 5. She's Lady Bunny full time. That's something I don't know if a person could do anymore.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, so you have to be, the only way you're ever going to be successful as a drag queen as far as making a living is if you produce your own events, or you're not at the mercy of somebody hiring you for something, because, it's you also, Jackie Beat said something, you have to really work hard and then the cream will rise to the top. It's only the people who work hard. She's an incredibly hard worker and she's got a drive. And when I say I was influenced by people like her and Bunny, I've seen how they operate. One of the saddest things to me is people who had their salad days or their glory days in the 90s, and they just live in that era. They just constantly just reminisce and talk about the 90s when they were young and blah, blah, blah. And I've never been that kind of person. And do you know Kembra Fowler from Voluptuous Horror of Karen Black?
I don't know. So
there's a band called the Voluptuous Horror of Karen Black with a lead singer. Her name is Kembra, and she has a great term for it, and which is she calls it yesterbating, where you just you're masturbating over the stuff that happened, back when you were like in your 20s. But Lady Bunny was like, she says my greatest events are yet to come, which is very optimistic for somebody who's like ancient like her, but still.
Exactly. I mean, patient zero.
Yeah, it's a very, very healthy attitude, because it's so easy to look back on your glory days and just be bitter about your current situation. And I think that's just the death of some people, is they just stop moving forward. So you just have to keep moving. And a great advice as you get older is never stop moving.
Exactly. And, all joking aside, Bunny is really good friend and an example, I think, of what a person can do if they're and as are you, if you're persistent and you have the passion and you just keep it moving and not live in yesterday. We all have to evolve.
Yeah.
But I had a question and I can't remember what it was. What is it like, when you're performing now and you sort of, because I know you have not altered, in my estimation, you have not altered your subject matter to suit the times. You have you seem to have a fan base of people who like you just as you are. Have you found that you've ever altered your set or your show based on sort of the climate?
I mean, sure. I feel like you have to be able to read a room, So if I'm hired for some corporate gig, I'm not going to be like, But definitely there are times when I'm like, okay, I'm not going to. If I'm hired to perform at the W Hotel, I'm not going to be like, hey, you motherfuckers,
Yeah.
But if I'm in some, I think what you mean is like a nightclub setting, like a raunchy dive of a nightclub.
Right.
I do not ever, and I never really did. I never really made racist jokes. I am much more raunchy, I think, like sexually and stuff. Like I see a lot of people doing the mea culpa nowadays of like, I'm sorry I did blackface back in the 90s, and even back in the 90s I was not that stupid, to do blackface. But
well, that's just not funny. I mean, it's not like funny. One of those things,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are certain things that are just never going to be funny. And I think I'm really happy I have an innate sense of what is funny and what is not. And yeah, I've definitely had my moments of being controversial. I think anybody who is performing on stage, there's always going to come a time when you've offended somebody or something like that, and then it gets blown up. And there's been those times for me, but pretty few and far between, I think. So to answer your question, I do not alter my personality too much.
Awesome. That's great. And it's a great entertainer will always read a room. You know, that's the essence of entertainment. What do you think of now? When you interviewed Floyd, one of the main subjects that you guys spoke at length, and it was interesting to hear all the behind the scenes, was sort of the RuPaul's Drag Race. I've had very little experience with Ru myself. Refused to share a dressing room with me back in 1994, and was very unpleasant. In my, I think there's now a uniform. There's like the anime eyebrows. There's a whole, whole sort of, above ground drag now. What are your thoughts? Tell me what you think about Drag Race, the post Drag Race world.
Well, gosh, there's so much that I think about it. It could go on for hours, but I'll just say that. Yes, I'll say about RuPaul herself, I never trust anybody who cannot be a cunt in public. And, because I've always found like people like Lady Bunny, Jackie Beat, Bianca Del Rio, they're horrible cunts on stage, but then they're actually human beings off stage. And I found that sometimes the exact opposite is true. So I don't fall for people when they're like, love everybody, blah, blah, blah. I just don't buy it. And then I'll say about RuPaul's Drag Race that there's a whole slew of performers coming out of that show who know how to paint the white strip down their nose, and they know how to contour and all that stuff, but they have nothing to give to an audience once they're on stage. And once again, Lady Bunny, she's so wise. I was talking to her about it, and she's like, yeah, some of the best people, some of the most amazing performers are people like Dame Edna or, other people like that. It doesn't matter what your makeup is like. It's what you bring on stage,
Right.
And some of the most transcendent performances I've seen are people whose makeup is terrible, Dina Martina or whatever, you know what I mean? Or so I think so many kids put so much stock into how they look and whether they look exactly like their idol from RuPaul's Drag Race. So their makeup is great, but once you put them on stage, talk about not knowing how to read a room. When I was running Oasis Saturday nights, I booked all the RuPaul girls, and I would just be so blown away. There'd be lines around the block to see some of these girls, and there was nothing coming from them on stage. And sometimes, actually, the local girls had to come on stage and do damage control because people were like, that show was terrible.
Yeah. I mean, you can't fake talent. You can't,
No.
you just, and what it seems like, I was talking also to Bunny about this, and one of the interesting points that she made was the punishment for like not meeting the challenge is that you lip sync, which is what drag queens have like kind of done. The punishment for not doing some like arbitrary challenge is at the end you have to lip sync to a song that neither queen knows, and it's sort of that's the punishment. That's the like you're going to be eliminated.
Right.
If you don't do drag. It just seems like a contradiction in a way.
Right, and there's no training ground better than spending years in front of live audiences and managing hecklers and dealing with the crowd and all that stuff. And it's like that is the real. And the best performers and the people who are going to last from that show are the people who had drag training before they went on that show. And I'm talking about people who, a lot of them I had at Tranny Shack before they went on RuPaul's Drag Race. Alaska Thunderfuck, Bianca Del Rio, Willem, Raja, Angela Cram, Jinx Monsoon, they're all people who, and Detox, they've all performed in front of crowds. They cut their teeth in, dive bars. So
I think, there's a lot, like I do enjoy, I worked with Katya. She comes from Boston. I worked with her back then before her RuPaul days. Genius. Genius performer, very cerebral, thinks about, creating a character, thinks about the humor. I kind of like Trixie Mattel, but I don't watch the show, and people, kind of read me for that. Why don't you watch the show? It's right up there. Why don't you go on the show? And I'm like, never, never.
Yeah, there was a period where they were talking to me and Peaches Christ about, going on the show. And I talked to a couple people, including Alaska, and they're like, I don't think you should, because at that point, both Peaches and I had kind of formed our own personalities already. You don't know how they're going to edit you once you go on there. And you can come off being like Mimi M. First, where you're like, the villain or whatever.
I used to be close to, well, not close to, but, friendly with Alexis Arquette, and she called it Franken editing. She's like, they did it in all the reality show that she was on there with Florence Henderson. She's like, you'd have like one conversation, and then you'd watch the episode, and it would be a completely different reality, like nothing even close,
Right.
So
Absolutely.
So I definitely get that. It's a reality TV isn't really reality. I mean,
no.
And I think we have sacrificed, some of the most the thing that I find the most disheartening about a post RuPaul's Drag Race world is that a lot of really talented and amazing entertainers have been sort of put out of work by, like, the mediocrity. You really have to fight. I mean, we're people who fight for our place, but some people I've seen, they don't have it in them to fight, anymore, and they're just, they've gotten older and they get given it up, because of all of this, RuPaul's Drag Race,
Yeah, I mean, the average drag fan before RuPaul's Drag Race they were into exploring and learning about these performers they'd heard just vaguely about. So if I booked Jackie or Sherry or Bunny at one of my clubs, it would be crowded and packed because people were like, oh, I've heard about this person, I should check them out. And now nobody wants to go see anything unless it's a RuPaul girl. So yeah, it just seems so bizarre to me. Like a great example of how bizarre that is I had Varla Jean Merman for a run at Oasis. She did Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And, it was like a 100-person sit-down show. And then she left. And then after her Saturday night show, I had a nightclub that night where I booked a RuPaul girl. And there was a line around the block for her. And people were passing out from heat exhaustion. And it was like 500 or 600 people packed in there to see her. And her show was just horrendous, And there you have Varla Jean Merman, this amazing veteran performer, and just not pulling the same kind of a crowd. Like over 3 nights could not pull the same amount of people that this RuPaul pulled. And it was like the emperor has no clothes. There was nothing there,
Right. Well, I've seen, I mean, the last time I read anything, RuPaul, I guess, is doing a series on how to be successful. What is it? Like one of those TED Talk type things. And I thought it was really funny that he said, I just read some of the curriculum online that was referenced, and she said something to the effect of, names can be real, like mine, RuPaul Charles, that's a real name, or it can be punny, like Eileen Dover, or Mimi, I'm first. And those queens are always as memorable and as amazing as the name. And I'm like, girl, you are never nice to me. You've never we've never shared the same air, for a handful of times where you really, really just couldn't be bothered. And, we're really, really, she seems to be very comfortable with, lifting things still from the underground and from the nightlife scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, brings me to the next thing. What do you think is happening with the night? I mean, do you think that, you've owned clubs as a proprietor. What do you how is that different from being like there's a million ways that it's different, but how is that different? Like, when you're running the show, when you're in total charge.
What do you mean? How is it different?
Like how, when you're booked and you show up to a venue to do the show, you worry about you worry about your show, if you have dancers, things like that. But when you're, the owner, when you're running a night, you're in charge of everything, all the details. Did you find that was more rewarding? Did you find that?
Well, it's much more profitable, but no, it's not that rewarding. It was something I thought I wanted until I had it.
Yeah.
I was like, I want my own venue, I want my own nightclub, and then I got my own nightclub, and it was a lot more work than I thought for a lot less money. So because there's so much money that has to go into it, especially in an expensive city like San Francisco. So I did not consider dealing with payroll and taxes and liquor inventory and hiring security and DJs and managing the drag, like all that stuff it was a job that never stopped. So I am grateful to be back in the position of just being just me, telling myself or whoring myself.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, I think. What do you think is what's in the future? I mean, we're living in very uncertain times. It sounds like you're doing a great thing, going to Iceland and entertaining the folks there in your hometown. And what's in the future? What are you planning?
Well, I think that like anything, what the situation we're going through won't last. It'll go away eventually, and things will look different for a while. I think it'll take a while for nightlife to fully bounce back. So I am just going to try to come up with other means to make a living doing drag. The online thing, we had to learn how to do the online thing almost overnight, and that's kind of an uncharted territory. Doing all that stuff, trying to figure out how to be entertaining when people are watching you on a tiny screen. And I think the one-woman, Zoom shows have gotten pretty played out. So I'm trying to think of, But if you're talking about further down the line, once COVID does go away, I think maybe I'm going to move full-time to Palm Springs and maybe open a venue there for theater and cabaret. That's kind of my next, instead of owning a huge nightclub like I did here in San Francisco, something smaller, on a smaller scale, something I might want to be doing, and turning Palm Springs into a stop. Right now, if there's somebody traveling, if there's a drag queen traveling on the West Coast, they're going to San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, maybe Portland, and I'd like to make Palm Springs another stop there.
That's awesome. There's definitely an audience there.
And there's a need for it. There's really nothing there right now, which is so crazy to me.
Exactly. Well, we've covered pretty much everything. I guess one of the things that I do ask a lot of people when I interview them is, what would you say if you could go back to a young Heklina, while you were going through all the craziness of, discovering you were different and all that, what would you say to that person? What would you say to somebody who's just coming into that now?
Well, I think it's what I would say to anybody, because I tried to fit in. This is going to sound like such a cliche, but, you know, you try to fit in to the people around you and the things you see around you, and that never made me happy. And that included when I came out and I went out into the gay world and I saw, you know, circuit parties and these other things that just didn't speak to me. So be yourself and don't worry about what other people think about you.
I think cliches come about because they're true, you know.
Yeah.
And they make sense. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say to the masses?
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me so much. It was fun.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward. I hope you have a fantastic time in Iceland, and send all of our love there. And can't wait to hear how that goes for you.
Thanks again, Eileen Dover.
Thank you, love. Talk to you soon.
Right. Bye.
Bye-bye. That was Heklina. Thank you for listening. This is Eileen Dover, signing off.